So, Todd, I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to take a deeper dive into some of your written work, but also some of the experiences and learnings that you have simply as a leader, but especially as a leader who helps build capacity in other leaders. So we're going to have a time of dialogue between you and myself, and then, of course, eventually we will invite those both joining us virtually and those in the sanctuary to ask their questions as well. But I want us to go to some of the deepest things that we know. And so, got a couple of questions for you to get us started. Coffee or tea?
Coffee, every time.
Decaf or regular?
There's a thing called decaf. What's that?
Okay.
Is that something? Yeah. No, regular. Coffee every time, regular every time.
So you want it leaded. I completely understand. Cream and sugar or straight up?
Cream.
Cream.
Sugar.
No sugar. All right.
Coffee, 2 creams.
Excellent. Now we know some
Exactly.
very important information
Exactly.
about our guest. Thank you. So it was wonderful to hear you take us into the book that you're working on. Has that been published yet?
No. Actually, not even finished yet. You guys are one of the first people to work with it. So any feedback, I will take it. And if any good stories come out of this thing, I'm using them. So just need you to know that. So.
Amen. So know that, right? Just know that. I wonder then, the book that we have here, and that all of those who are registered participants will receive a copy of your book, Tempered Resilience. I have been working with those that work at the conference office. We have been walking through that book. And again, it has just been, it's been a blessing, and it's been challenging. And it is something that I know I will read over and over again, because each time I go back through it, as I'm leading different groups that work for the Mission Center through it, I find something new and interesting every time. Will you give us a synopsis of Tempered Resilience?
Yeah, so I did a little bit earlier today when I talked about sabotage, and the district superintendent who said, I don't think anybody have the stomach for this. The problem with this is the resistance of our own people. One of the things we discovered all along, and most of us got this too, right? The most difficult thing, the most demoralizing thing for most leaders is that when the very people who ask us to lead them, resist us, we experience it as sabotage. And so Ed Friedman wrote about sabotage, and what I found wherever I went to talk about canoeing the mountains, everybody wanted to talk about the chapter on sabotage. And he says that sabotage is normal, it's natural, it's to be expected. Part and parcel of the leadership process. That you can't even say you're successful at making a change until you make a change, then survive the sabotage that happens every single time. And it happens after you've made the change. So you've gotten the votes, people agreed to do something, you got voted in to be the new pastor who's going to bring change, then the sabotage comes. I always say it's not the bad things that evil people do, it is the human things anxious people do.
Say that one more time.
Yeah, it's not the bad things that evil people do, it's the human things anxious people do.
And so that, I don't mean to interrupt
Please,
you,
please.
But I'll try to remember to follow up, because I feel like what you just described is exactly what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was talking about in those ministers who wrote to him, which then prompted his letter from a Birmingham jail, right?
Yeah. So I always say to people that so that Dr. King became really important to me in writing this book. The whole metaphor of tempered resilience comes out of the "I Have a Dream" speech.
Yes.
It's that incredible phrase that says, with this faith, right? And he's just quoted Isaiah 40, right? So long passage of Isaiah 40 that wasn't in the original text, right? It was because Mahalia Jackson said, tell him about the dream.
About the dream,
right?
That's right.
He goes into Isaiah 40. Clarence B. Jones, his speechwriter, says to the person next to him, these people don't know if they're about to go to church, right? Isaiah 40, because the mountains will be brought low, the rough places plain. Because we believe there is a day that's going to come that God is going to redeem this world down to the dirt. We go back to work. He said to people who their work had been the protests, the marches, the lunch counters, the dogs, the hoses, the jails. Right. So he's telling people we got to go back into that. then he says, with this faith, we'll be able to hew out of a mountain of despair stones of hope. And for me, the whole idea of tempered resilience is how do you become a tool that can hew? And the mountain of despair is the way people describe sabotage. So you think, I use the letter to the Birmingham jail because I always say every year on MLK Day, when you'd think that how much I love that speech, I'd go watch that speech, but I don't. Okay. I read the letter to the Birmingham jail because it was written to Presbyterian, Episcopalian, and Methodist clergy who said, we're not opposed to your goals, we're just not comfortable with your method. Now, they were so uncomfortable with the method that they, of course, preached against it on Sunday morning and wrote a letter to the editor and then, decided which Dr. King got smuggled into him, and he wrote the response saying that it was the most discouraging thing because it was his clergy brothers and sisters who came up against him. That's sabotage. And it's in the light of that idea that we then have to ask how we get resilience, and tempered resilience is about the process of being formed in resilience while you're facing the mountain of despair.
Can you talk about some of the other metaphors that you used? You alluded to them today, the anvil, the hammer, the blacksmith. Talk to us about your story of the blacksmith shop that you and your wife encountered years ago.
Yeah, so if you ask the question, what kind of tool hews stones out of, it's a tempered tool. It's not a sledgehammer, it's a chisel, right? Sledgehammers are just hard. Chisels have tempering, which means they're both strong and flexible. They can go with the grain, they can carve something out. So I decided to look up tempering tools, and I was watching, and then finally I found that in Los Angeles, there's a blacksmithing community. It's in a neighborhood, they haven't had a horse there in 100 years, but they got blacksmiths, right? And so we took this classes, and what I discovered is that process of turning steel into a tool, of fire, and of holding, the anvil, and of hammering, which is the way I think about the spiritual practices, how they shape us and they give us strength, right? And quenching, which is the slow, regular release, is a little metallurgy that nobody cares about. But to make a tool tempered, you can't just drop it into water. You have to let it slowly cool down repetitively. So I say, for all of us as clergy who think stuff like, as long as I get a sabbatical every 7 years or maybe one good vacation every year, I'll be fine. Right. No, you won't. You'll become brittle. To get rid of the stress, which is what's happening when you're letting it slowly, you regularly need to basically get rid of the stress by releasing it. And for me, that's more than rest. For me, that's also things like I need to have areas in my life that I feel competent in. Right. I have areas in my life where I'm having enjoyment, and we talk a lot about rhythms of leading and not leading. Right. So it's a process. It's the most important part, Bishop, is, and this is the part that I think you guys are already exemplifying, is tempered resilience happens when you're facing the mountain of despair. The tool is formed. Leaders are formed in the leading. And for many of us, that's a big disappointment because you think, by the time I became a bishop, I've got it all figured out, right? Yeah. Or by the time they make me a pastor. I always say, they make you a pastor right after someone hears you preach, as if somehow 3 points in a poem is the same thing as leading the people, right? So you're good at preaching, and then the next thing they do is they put you in front of being a pastor, and you realize, I'm not good at any of this. Well, that's normal. That's normal. That's the vulnerability that is like the heat that leads to the holding, that leads to the hammering. Yeah.
One of the things I most appreciated as I looked at your metaphors, and again, you just spoke to it, is you talked about this sweet spot that occurs between the tool that is soft enough to be able to use, but also strong enough to be able to hew, to chisel, to that kind of thing. And so, because you say if it's too soft, then you won't be able to withstand what's coming. Yeah. But if you're too hard, you'll become bitter. And I really want you to talk about this bitterness piece, because that's what I sense in too many of us at this season. There's sort of a bitterness. And I think that's part of what's led to the Great Resignation, is this sense of bitterness. Help us understand how we can resist that bitterness.
Yeah. So Ed Friedman talks about what he calls a failure of nerve, which is where you pick up the anxiety of the group And because they're anxious, you stop the transformation process. It's literally like when you find yourself saying stuff like, "Oh, I think we have change fatigue. I think we need to slow everything down." You know, I don't oppose your goals. I just oppose your methods, right? It's failure of nerve. I discovered in me a different failure, which I call a failure of heart. It's Moses in Numbers 11 when they start grumbling the second time. I mean, the first time they grumble because of the manna. Right? God gives them manna. The second time they grumble, not because they're hungry, but because they're bored with the miracle God's doing every morning. Oh my gosh, manna again. Maybe we should go be enslaved again because then we could have flesh pots. You know, I'm thinking, right? We could have meat. Oh, that'd be great. It must be barbecue. Is all I could think of. Like that would make me go back, right? And so we're thinking like, oh my gosh. Well, he gets angry. He gets so mad. He says to God, if you're going to leave me with these people, you can kill me now. Right, which I don't know if you ever came home on a Sunday afternoon and said that to your spouse. But
tell the whole truth, right?
But I'll bet you came home at least once and thought, I could sell real estate. I could sell life insurance. I could teach biology. I always think this is where I could go back. I could do trail maintenance in the national park. I could pick up trash, move rocks. That's a failure of heart. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we mapped it onto was that bitterness shows up in leaders as brittleness. Mm-hmm. You become brittle. When you have so much stress, you get so angry at the resistance that you didn't want to be soft, right? Don't want to have a failure of nerve, but you end up getting just brittle and you break. And I learned this from a blacksmith. She was a woman who led this thing. She said, you got to realize that I'm not a big woman, but you give me this hammer and you give me a piece of steel. If I just keep hitting that steel, I can break that steel in half. Because what it is it's putting stress into the steel with every hammer blow. It's getting more and more and more compact until finally it breaks. So think about this. The same tool you use to make a chisel, when you turn around and start using that chisel, you're doing the same thing. You're pounding until finally it explodes. So you have to, what you're literally trying to do, this is why it's a formation thing. It's never a resilience is like, how tough are you? Goal isn't to become like Navy SEALs. The goal is to be people who wisely are able to navigate and carve, shape, transform. I love Dr. King's hew out of a mountain of despair, stones of hope. With this faith, we'll be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. That's parallelism. That's masterclass in preaching right there, right?
Amen.
That notion of hewing and transforming. When I become a tool that can transform, it also protects me from becoming too brittle or too soft. I have to be formed for that tool. It's like a sharpened chisel.
And so I love how you help us to understand resilient leaders are not avoiding stress, right? I mean, I must say that I think at one time I thought, well, I just have to get to the place where there's no stress. I'm not feeling stress. But you're telling us stress is what helps to make the resilient leader.
Yeah, so there's this interesting thing. I don't think I put it in the book, but it's been one of the things that shaped me is Ignatius of Loyola, leader of the Jesuit, has this great passage where he says he believes that God wants us to be under what he calls moderate stress. It is the stress that keeps us growing. It's like what I was talking about earlier today between care and comfort.
Right.
Like it's not about being comfortable, but it's also not about being left alone. It's about being cared for in your vulnerability. Right? You don't take a piece of steel out of a fire at 2,000 degrees when it's all soft and hit it in midair. Okay. It'll explode. You have to put it on the anvil. So it's that notion of giving that kind of care in the middle of it that makes that possible. And I think for many of us, we get stuck. We think there needs to be no stress, or we're supposed to just gut it out. And it's actually right there in the middle, the rhythm of stress and release, stress and release. So I'll give this illustration. This illustration annoys people, but this is where I am in my life, right? My kids are grown, okay? So my kids are grown. I don't have little kids at home. My wife and I live in our house. She's a working artist. I'm a morning person, and I work with a lot of people on the East Coast. So I work in the morning hours. She likes to sleep in, exercise, and then she goes to her studio. My favorite part of the day is at 5 o'clock I get done with my day, I walk in, I pour her a glass of wine, she's got music going in the studio, and I go make her dinner. So I cook dinner. You know why? Okay, see, I know this always gets people in trouble. I'm so sorry about this, but but here's why. Even if you cook a mediocre meal, they're happy with you.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And I spend all day without people happy at me. Like all day I'm working with leaders who are like, this happened, somebody's running with the scissors, these people are doing this, like, right? So at the end of my day, she looks at me and she goes, thank you so much. And so then what I do is I work really hard on being a good cook. I'm actually pretty good now. And the reason why is because it makes her happy, right? So having something that I can do at the end of every day that just feels like I'm competent. Oh, I just didn't burn the butter. Oh, right? It's so great. And it actually does release my stress, and it prepares me for the next day.
Excellent, excellent. Well, one of the overarching premises of your book that leads to all of this kind of discussion that we're having is something that I think some of us were taught just the opposite. Some of us, know those old tropes of leaders are born, not made. But your overarching premise is that leadership can be taught.
Yeah.
I resonate with that so much. And again, through this imagery that you're talking about, you help to explain exactly how we become those leaders. But why such stark imagery, right? I mean, because on the other hand, it could also become off-putting, right?
Oh, yeah.
So the fire, got to go into the fire, right? So it's got to be able to withstand the heat.
Yeah.
Help us understand why those metaphors are so apropos for those of us that are leading, and especially leading at this time in history.
Yeah. So if you believe that leadership is formed, I think leadership is formed like any skill. Leadership is a skill. I tell people, I work at a seminary. We teach everybody how to preach. Not everybody shows up with natural gifts. Right? I'm sure somebody said to you early, you can preach. You can not, you're probably like me. We got stop, you got to speak in turn, right? We were probably told we talk too much, right? But we teach everybody how to preach because it's a skill set you can teach people. I think leadership is a skill set you can teach people. But what you have to recognize is the difference is that we all know people who can be good orators who can't live it.
Right.
And really good leaders have to embody the change, which means you have to go through it. So whenever you talk to leaders about that, and this is the difference between the narcissistic platformed person who's really charismatic, but ultimately becomes a really bad leader because they can't bring transformation, because they can't embody it. They experience that as being really painful. So the first part of that process is, the heat. My dad used to always quote Harry Truman, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. Right. I always like to say, the kitchen isn't hot enough. The real heat is the heat of your own self-reflection. Wow. You all know that worse than the meeting at 7 p.m. is your internal voice at midnight. Right? It's that internal, when you're at that moment, when you need to reflect on, man, I lost my cool with that person. And quite frankly, I lose my cool with that person every time. Or if that person one more time talks with me with that tone of voice, I'm going to take them out, right? You find yourself, you start recognizing it's that internal self-reflection that is the most vulnerable thing we face. And that's actually where the change can come. And there's that famous passage in Dr. King's own life where he literally, so you all know this probably better than I do, right? He was 26
That's right.
when he became the leader of the Montgomery Bus boycott. And it's just because his church was the biggest church. They said, we're going to meet it.
He was a good preacher.
And he was a good preacher, so you're going to get up front and welcome everybody, Dr. King. And then, oh, by the way, we all decided you're going to be the leader. 26. A year-long boycott. A year long. Of course it falls apart at certain times. He's got to hold it together. In the middle of the night one night, he said, if I could get out of this thing without people thinking I'm a coward, I would quit today. And that's where God met him. He said that was the moment that he felt like God said to him, Martin Luther, I will be with you no matter what you go through. And I think that's the kind of moments that led him even to times like, if you think about that amazing speech in Memphis where he says, I've seen the promised land and I may not get there with you. Right. Not, the next day, the assassin's bullet takes him. And you're sitting there thinking, his capacity to courageously walk through all that wasn't because he was faking it.
Right.
It's because he was honest before God about it. And that's the heat.
So you now make me think about Mother Teresa and, of course, that dark night of the soul. But that comes through a consistent willingness to do reflection.
Yes.
Right? I must confess, one of the things that I find frustrating as I am attempting to be a servant leader across the conferences is encountering leaders who think they have it all, understand it all, know it all, been there, got the T-shirt to prove it. I must tell you, that is for me one of the most frustrating. I'm not as frustrated with people who simply need a little more capacity building.
Right.
I'm not frustrated with people that we need to send to a different kind of class to help prop them up on some leaning side. So talk to us about, again, how important these spiritual disciplines are. But you talked this morning about humility. Help us understand how we will not become the leaders God intends for us to be if we don't have that humility, if we can't admit that sometime we're wrong, if we can't understand that we too need to grow. I know I need to grow to continue to be the servant leader God has called me to be.
Yeah. So it's so interesting because this is right at the crux, I think, and it makes sense to me that those would be the people that would most trigger you. That makes total sense to me because they're dangerous.
Say so.
Yeah, those are those. Yeah, right, they're dangerous. So in the blacksmithing analogy, it was this: we put the steel into the fire, and you're sitting the steel's in the fire, and they tell you to take it out, and they go look at it. It looks the same. It's still gray, and it's still real solid, it's real hard. It's 700 degrees. It'll burn the skin off your hands.
Okay.
At this temperature, it's only dangerous. There's nothing you can do with it. You can't shape it. You got to put it back in the fire until it gets to 2,000 degrees. At 2,000 degrees, it changes color and it gets soft. Like gravity makes it bend.
Okay.
Right? What too many of us have said, "Oh, we're good leaders. I'm good with fire. Let me tell you about the last church I was in, how hard that was, and how great I was." And oh, you think these people are hard? And like they're 700 degrees. Wow. 2,000 degrees is when you're saying, "Bishop, I got to get time with you. I need the DS here just to make sure I need help in this meeting, or I may not do well." This is that vulnerability is what shapes you. And I would go so far as to say this: I'm not a person who believes that everybody has to agree with me about adaptive leadership or leadership models. There's a lot, but I don't think you can become a transformational, resilient leader if you can't be vulnerable. And humility is about teachability.
Yes.
It's not low self-esteem.
Right.
It's just teachability. And this is important for me because I've had particularly women and I've had leaders of color who've said to me, "Todd, don't ever forget, you stand up in front of people, you're a 58-year-old white guy with a PhD. You talk about being humble, everybody gets all mushy."
Right. That's
right.
right.
Really sweet. For us, if we act vulnerable, people go find you and want to give you our job.
That's right.
Right?
That's true.
Right?
True.
So the goal isn't, make you feel incompetent. The goal is you need to be teachable. And you may or may not be in a setting that it's okay for you to be able to say that outside. You got to make it's got to be as safe, but you internally need to be able to say, "Hey, here's where I need to grow. Here's where I need to be teachable. I need to be in a safe place with good mentors where I can work that on."
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, a component of that then too, of course, is you talk about you have to know that you've been called to this work. You have to know your own purpose so that when you are rejected, so that when your vision is resisted, you can still stand.
Yeah.
How did you know you were called to this purpose?
Well, so this is it through a lot of times it not working, a lot of sabotage. I helped lead our denomination in a 2-year process that was going to try to hold us together, and that went well. What helped is internally, I had to ultimately hold on to what am I really called to do?
Yes.
And one of the parts I got clear on, and I talk about this, I think of this as like the steel, the raw material of the steel. The quality of the steel is, in almost all the literature, it goes in one of two ways. spiritual formation literature talks about the very best leaders are people whose identity is in Christ. When Paul says, I'm in Christ, it's usually in a moment where he's having to take on the church. Because I'm in Christ, I'm not belonging necessarily you, Galatians, or you, Ephesians, or you, Corinthians. I'm in Christ. I can be faithful. That in psychological language is what differentiation is. I have the identity that can stay connected. When Paul says he's in Christ, he's not doing it by disconnecting from the Galatians or the Corinthians. He says, it's because I'm in Christ, I can stay connected. Same thing. For me, what this comes back to calling is the language of grounding. I'm grounded, and this is the way I put it, is leaders who can lead change are grounded in something other than their need to be successful.
Okay.
Because there's no way we can guarantee that part.
That's right. That's rich.
So for me, this is where, when Jesus first comes out of the wilderness, and it says it's before he goes to the wilderness, at this time, and he goes to be baptized. And the words come out, you are my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased, right? At this time, at what time? Before he'd done anything.
Anything.
Right? Not one sermon, not one miracle. Nobody knew him except for his cousin. God was already pleased with him. So to me, my calling is to live in the awareness that I am called by God to express God's love for me that he's already given me, and that I'm supposed to do so clearly for for me, my mission is to help faith leaders thrive as change leaders. That's what I do. I don't ever promise anybody that I can help you change your church.
Okay.
But what I can do is help you thrive as a change leader. I can teach you how to do change, and I can help you thrive as a change leader. Whether your church changes is as much about the capacity of your church as it is about you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. How do we know the difference between coming up against resistance and sabotage and us being on the wrong road?
Yeah, good. This is the question I always hope gets asked. So there's a big difference between, if you want to be humble, you've got to be open to critique. Well, if you're a narcissist, you can just call everybody a saboteur. See, you're sabotaging, you are too. If you just all didn't know, I have got, God spoke to me. So who needs a pillar of clouds or fire? You got me, right? That's right. Okay, so here's the way we know. And this is when we coach and we work with people, we talk about this. Sabotage always wants the status quo.
Okay.
If you and I are partners and we're both heading in the same direction, and you and I might have honest disagreements, we're having disagreements as we work toward that mission.
Right.
The sabotage wants to go back. So the way I know the difference is when I'm talking to a partner or people on and they're saying, hey, I'm not sure that's the right tactic, it might be this tactic, that's when I need to be most open. I need to be open when I want to be doubled down on my tactic. Because that's where my teammates can actually help us together get wiser. That's critique, that's healthy critique, that's learning, that's growing, that's experimenting, all those things. Sabotage wants to go back. Sabotage says, hey, they killed our children, but we did have leeks and onions.
Right.
Maybe we should go back. I always tell the story that if you ever ask me to preach, here's the sermon you get. On the other side of the Red Sea, right? They crossed the Red Sea. 650,000 of them had the greatest miracle anybody would ever see until the resurrection.
Right.
Not only are they freed, but Pharaoh's chariots are dead, gone. 6 weeks later, they want to go back. 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Lent. I always have to tell the Baptists, Thanksgiving to New Year's. Right? But that's how long? 6 weeks after the greatest miracle ever, they're saying, leeks and onions, those are pretty awesome. That's sabotage. Sabotage wants the status quo. That's what the letter to the Birmingham jail.
Right.
Oh, we're not against what you want to do. We're against your method. What method? 50 people dressed in their Sunday best, walking down on Good Friday, the middle of the street, just silently protesting because Bull Connor said they couldn't have a permit.
Right.
That was it. That was so disruptive. Oh my gosh, how uncomfortable. Oh my God.
You touched on it this morning, and perhaps again, this dovetails with some of what you just said. In the book, you go to great lengths to make sure we understand the difference between management and leadership.
Yeah.
And again, you talk about management just gets us to a predetermined destination. We all just know that we need to, you said, we took the young people on a camping trip, we've got to bring them back. We've got to bring them back. Leadership always demands something else. It seems to me, this is part of why managers are revered, leaders are reviled.
Yeah, yeah, managers, see, we love managers, right? Everything is, managers take care of the stuff that's most important to us. I mean, my colleague Scott Cormode calls it, you take care of the things entrusted to your care. Oh my gosh, we love them. So, and good, we should love them.
Right.
Leaders, however, require you to go through transformation. Oh, we just wish we could manage our problem. I mean, don't just wish we could just do better. If we just had a better organ, wouldn't that be great? People would just show up, or if we just, had a really good preschool, and we wouldn't have, I mean, like if we could just manage our way out of this problem, we wish we could. And that was the problem during the Christendom years. You could actually, if you had a well-run church, people would come because everybody was going to church, right? If you just were if you didn't have an ethical problem, or you didn't, weren't annoying, people would come. Today, it's going to require literally us to transform the people in the pews to reach people who aren't even interested in coming.
Right, that's right. As we are first transformed.
Yes,
right?
yes.
As we are first transformed.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the problems we're going to run into of resistance, of sabotage. For me, as I read your work, the nemesis that I have to wrestle with is time.
Oh.
It takes time to be able to help lead systemic change.
Yeah.
Now, I know you're not naive about the United Methodist Church. Man, we're on a system, right?
Yeah.
It's a system, and it's a cyclical system.
Yeah.
In the fall, it's all about church conferences. In the spring, it's all about appointment.
Yeah.
After the end of the spring, it's about an annual conference, our annual meeting. Then everybody takes a little break.
Yeah.
And then we come back in September, we start it all over again.
Yes, yes.
Right? There's this cyclical process. So for me, this notion of time, both the time that the system demands of us, but also the time that's required to see things through, that, again, this notion of itineracy that we have, that, you're only supposed to be somewhere for 3 to 5 years, or if you're an Episcopal leader, for maybe, if you're fortunate, 8 years, if you're a district superintendent, 6 to 8 years. How do we continue to be tools of transformation when time is such a nemesis?
Oh man, this is a good conversation. And as a bishop, I want to ask you about this. This is what I want. I'm kind of curious about yours. So let me say this, and I'd love you to push back on this, or give this back to me, because I have when we coach people, we have the set of questions we use. Our company is a very simple coaching company because we only work on one thing, which is adaptive capacity coaching. Right. That's what we work on. I said it's like a little bit like if you took your kids to a soccer coach and they said, oh, we're only going to teach you to be goalkeepers. Like we just work on this one thing. Right. How to help faith leaders thrive as change leaders. But whenever we do, we get to like, what's the real problem that you're dealing with? Like, what's the problem? What's the adaptive challenge you got to give yourself to? I train my coaches. You are not allowed to get off the call until you ask the question, so what are you not going to do to give to this? Because what we talked about this morning is adaptive change is always in a competing value that has a win-lose. It's not a win-win. Right. So you're really competent. And if you keep cramming stuff in, what you will do is all the stuff that everybody wants to do. Like the system, the cyclical system is part of the status quo. Right. So to be able to say, what are we not going to do? Right? What's the canoe? Right?
Oh, they're thinking right
Yeah, really,
now.
right, really,
They're
yeah,
thinking
yeah.
right now.
Yeah. So I'll give you one example of one of my churches. So I'm working with a church. It's a progressive church in the Midwest who literally said that one of the things they wanted to grow in is they wanted to be more and more of a light in their neighborhood. They're in the Minneapolis area. They've been very progressive about LGBTQ, but they said we've not been on race, and we need to be. After George Floyd, they were another one of these churches that felt very convicted. And they said, we've had all these things we're doing. It's really great, but what we're realizing is that our people are quick to sign up for the latest, march or rally or food bank or thing, but they're getting burned out. And what they realized is what they needed was actually a formation, a deeper spiritual formation that would fuel their activity.
Okay.
So I said, okay, talk about experiments, safe, modest experiments. Here's your experiment. What are you going to do for spiritual formation without adding a program?
Okay.
You can't add any program. What are you going to do? So we started having this whole conversation about how they could change the way their meetings went. We just went one little experiment. Take 90 seconds at the beginning of a meeting to have everybody, before you start the meeting, say, where have I experienced the presence of God in my life this week? It's the prayer of examine question, right? Where are my consolations? Let everybody start the meeting profoundly grateful that God's already been working in my life. Then have the meeting. And then at the end of the meeting, in the last 90 seconds, stop and say, where did you experience God's presence in this meeting? And what we're going to do as a church is over the next year, we're going to pay so much attention to God's presence that we're going to ask, and so how did that change the way we did our programs?
Okay.
So I wouldn't let them add another program.
Right. Okay.
Now the question I think you're asking about itinerancy and stuff is interesting to me, because what I want to get to is I always want to ask the question, what does itinerancy do? What was it created for? What problem was it solving?
Right.
And do we have that same problem today?
Right. Right.
And that's how I know it's a canoe.
That's right.
It's a canoe when the geography's changed.
Right.
Right?
Yes, go ahead and clap. Yes.
That's very nice of you, because I wasn't sure what saying that to a bishop what was about to happen. I was going, we're going to cut this short and we're going to sing. We're all going to sing.
So much
Thank you for
coming.
coming. Yeah, I think we're going to get that praise band back up here. Yeah.
No, absolutely. If I had my druthers, folks would stay in their appointments until either they were ready to step down, or until their work of meeting the deep needs present, the pain points.
Yep.
He talks about the pain points in the book, that it's not just about preservation of the institution. It's about leaders being able to change themselves and then lead transformative change to meet the need, the pain points in the community.
Yes.
So for me, a leader would say, we've met X pain point. I was able to lead them through this. I think that's all I can do here. I'm ready to move on. If I had my druthers, that is what we would do.
Boom.
And I mean that. I have learned in my tenure that short appointments don't help us. They do not behoove us in the way that we say we are making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. They actually hurt that. It's the truth.
Yeah,
it's the actual truth. I've also had my ecumenical colleagues say one of the reasons we don't get connected to United Methodist leaders is because we know you don't stay long.
Yeah, you're going to be gone.
By the time we get to know you, you're gone.
Yeah.
And so we just don't bother because, someone else is coming. But beloved, what that requires is that you really are leading transformation.
Yes.
Right? And if you're doing that and you're not just there pacifying people so that they'll write you a good report, so that your SPRC loves you, and so that's why you think you get to stay. No, it's about really leading. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I'll keep saying it. I've got your back. Your district superintendents have your back. If you are attempting to lead real change that's going to bring about transformation in your community, I will stand with you through the weaponization of tithes and offerings. I'll stand with you as they march out the door to go join Acme Church down the street that just is pacifying people and talking about how happy we are and those things. I will stand with you. But that's what needs to be present. It can't be that there's ineptitude, that you're narcissistic and you want everybody to revolve around you. And so because they won't, then you say, well, this is the resistance I'm getting. No, they're not resisting change. They're resisting you, right? Because you have now become the problem. So I want you to understand, if you were doing real transformative work, both deepening discipleship within the church and getting to know and meeting the needs of your community outside of the church, I'll leave you there until the cows come home. Got no problem with that. So time really is part of the nemesis of us being able to do really good work.
Why? Part of the reason I just want to say that I think that's so powerful is that people often come to me and they'll say, this adaptive leadership thing, this is really, really great. How long are we going to be in this stage?
Wow.
And I always say, well, we were in Christendom for about 1,700 years, and we've been in post-Christendom for about 10 minutes.
Right.
So I'm guessing that I'm going to die in the wilderness, and so are you. So I'm claiming Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, right? Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in the future. So I'll be back in 70 years when you're going to be dead.
Right.
And when your kids are probably going to be dead. But because I'm going to give you hope in a future, if you're faithful, your grandchildren are going to see deliverance.
Exactly.
Right?
That's right.
Like, I believe in that hope.
Right.
That hope keeps me faithful today, where I don't believe I will see. That adaptation is a long adaptation.
Amen.
And that we need to be thinking long-term, building trust and working hard on transformation go together.
Right. And you said something this morning, and we're going to shift now to Q&A time with those who are with us. You said something this morning also, though, about just as leaders have to be very grounded in who they are and their call, communities, churches, spiritual centers, also you have to know who you are, so that when the next bishop comes, even though they may bring a few things that are different, the Peninsula Delaware and the Baltimore-Washington Conference are so grounded on who they are, some of this work will continue beyond their tenure and the next tenure. Your church communities ought to be so grounded in an identity of who they are and what God has called them to do, that different leaders may bring, again, a different nuance to it, but that work, that mission, that ministry continues beyond your tenure. And of course, one of the district superintendents, I won't call her out because I didn't ask her for her permission to share this before, but while we were studying your book in cabinet, she elicited the fact that some of us don't necessarily want to point folks to something greater than ourselves, beyond ourselves, because we need to be that center, okay? And so again, if we keep the focus on Christ, if we keep the focus on the cross, if we keep the focus on the community, then it can transcend even our tenure, no matter how short or long it is. And unfortunately, we've not done a good job in that. And so that's why communities continue to spin. So thank you for this conversation.
Fun.
We've been,
I love
is
this.
fun.
It's really fun.
It is fun.